Who's actually going to get the most out of a 1424mm f/2.8 on a Sony mount? Is it a must-have for landscape lovers, a gimmick for vloggers, or just an expensive piece of glass that sits on a shelf? And for the everyday shooter who isn't chasing the latest ultra-wide fantasy, does the price make sense? Those are the three questions I keep hearing in the comments when I bring up a new wide-angle zoom. So let's walk through them before you decide. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The first thing I did was look at how this lens fits into the broader Sony system. Sony users already have a huge selection of native lenses, but the native ultra-wide options stop at about 1224mm and often come with a variable aperture. Sigma's 1424mm f/2.8 lands right in that sweet spot. It gives you a constant, bright aperture across the whole zoom range, and the focal length is wide enough to capture sweeping vistas without the distortion you see at 12mm. That alone makes it attractive for a specific slice of the market, people who need a true, fast ultra-wide for stills or video, and who don't want to juggle a prime and a zoom. If you're a hobbyist who mostly shoots portraits or street scenes at 35mm or 50mm, this lens is probably overkill. The ultra-wide field of view can be a hassle in tight indoor spaces, and you'll end up cropping a lot if you're trying to get a tighter composition. Likewise, if you're on a tight budget, you'll find the price comparable to a couple of faster primes, and you might be better off stacking two lenses that cover more ground. In short, the people who should skip it are the casual shooters who rarely need to go wider than 24mm, and the budget-conscious who can make do with a slower, cheaper zoom. Now, let's get into the everyday reality of using this lens. I've taken it out for a full day of shooting in the mountains, a couple of hours of cityscape work at dusk, and a weekend of indoor event videography. The first thing you notice is the hypersonic motor. It's quiet enough that my microphone didn't pick up any focusing noise during a 4K walkthrough, which is a big win for video creators who have to worry about motor whine. The focus is also surprisingly snappy for a lens of this size. It locks onto a subject in under half a second, even in low light. That matters when you're trying to capture a fleeting moment, say, a burst of wind moving a ridge line or a child running through a park. Dust and splash-proof construction is more than a marketing line when you're shooting in alpine conditions. On the mountain trail, a sudden gust threw sand into the lens barrel, but the sealing held up, and I never had to wipe the front element. The same thing happened during an evening shoot under light rain. The lens stayed dry, and the image quality didn't suffer a single drop of water spot on the sensor. For anyone who spends time outdoors, that durability translates directly into less gear care anxiety. One of the less talked about aspects of this lens is the front conversion element that Sigma added for VR and multi-camera rigs. I'm not a VR specialist, but when I rigged two Sony a7 III bodies together for a 360-degree experiment, the lens's optics stayed consistent across both cameras, which saved me from having to do a lot of post-production stitching correction. If you're experimenting with immersive video, that hidden feature can save you hours of workflow. On the downside, the lens does have a few practical compromises. First, the size and weight are noticeable. At just under a kilogram, it adds a solid front end to any Sony body, and that extra heft can throw off balance, especially on smaller mirrorless bodies like the A6400. I found I had to adjust my grip and sometimes use a small tripod collar just to keep the camera from tipping forward. It's not a deal breaker, but it's something to factor in if you travel light. Second, while the constant f/2.8 aperture is great for low-light shooting, it also means the lens is more prone to chromatic aberration at the extreme edges of the frame, particularly when you push the zoom to 24mm and shoot high-contrast subjects like a bright sky against a dark foreground. The camera's in-body correction helped a lot, but you'll still see a slight color fringing if you look closely at the corners of a RAW file. It's not a showstopper for most applications, but if you need razor-sharp edges for architectural photography, you might need to spend a bit more time in post. Another practical consideration is the price point relative to native Sony lenses. Sigma positions this as a high-end art series lens, and it shows in the cost. For a Sony user who already owns a 1635mm f/4, the jump to a faster f/2.8 might feel steep, especially since the 1635mm can still cover most wide-angle needs. However, the 14-24mm is unique.